Welcome to the latest HRLocker podcast. On today's show, we have David Bell. David is the CEO of the HR department, a company providing professional personal HR services to businesses across Ireland. We talked to David about the tough subject of layoffs and redundancies. We ask him what are the key areas to consider when making these difficult decisions, and how can organisations maintain morale in such times. He also talks to us about how to minimise your organisation's exposure to COVID-related claims and why you should future-proof your policies and procedures to meet the changing way we work.
Today on the podcast, we have David Bell from the HR department. So we're delighted to have you here with us, David. And if you could introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, Christelle. Yes, it's David Bell. I'm the Managing Director of the HR department, and we provide HR support and consultancy for companies that don't really require a full-time HR person.
Perfect. Thanks, David. So again, we're delighted to have you here with us. And today we'll be talking about the current situation in terms of companies opening up, some offices opening, some offices closing, and really, I suppose, what is currently happening in the current workplace environment, and any kind of tips and tricks and any issues that companies may be experiencing during this time. So, David, a lot of businesses are unfortunately considering layoffs or redundancies. Really, I suppose, because cost cutting is something that's an issue for people at the moment. So for those companies who find themselves, unfortunately, with no other options, what are the key considerations and how can they minimize disruption as well as maintaining morale in these kind of negative times?
Yeah, well, obviously, you can see it from the news coverage. Apart from sort of the obvious sectors in the hospitality, which have been so badly hit, there are obviously a lot of other companies where businesses has been affected. So companies are looking at it. I suppose to maybe take a step back, one of the things that we would always say is that communication, you don't want to be continuously delivering doom and gloom, but I do think, it sometimes companies wait for way too long before they start making these decisions, before there's any alternative, if you know what I mean. So what they really should look at as a precursor to any redundancies, if they can, unless there is a particular situation where, say, an office closed or a business closes or a part of the business closes because of something that happens. But by and large, it may be a sort of a situation where you can try and look at alternatives. And we would always say, both to protect yourself, perhaps, against maybe a case taken by someone that you didn't follow proper procedure, but more important, I think, from the staff's perspective, that people are told that there is a possibility that there might be some job losses, even if it seems that it's very obvious. I think sometimes staff really don't think that might happen, even if it's the worst case, and maybe look at some alternatives. Now, I won't get into collective. There are certain situations where you have to do that under the collective redundancies. That's based on the number of potential job losses versus the number of employees that you have. But if we take it that even if you don't have to do it by law, I think it's still a good discipline to get into, that you start with some form of consultation, either with the staff in general or with those areas of the business where you think there may be redundancies down the road.
Even if a company is they're unsure, they're hoping that they're not going to have to go down that route. Do you think at that stage the companies should be making employees aware, or do you think they should kind of wait until they know?
Well, I think if it's financially driven, I suppose they should look at alternatives. So, I suppose the obvious ones would be reducing working time, or maybe looking for pay reductions, job sharing. Is there any roles, in other words, that two people could do a job that was one job that might have been two in the past. There's some more, dare I say it, adventurous and more far-reaching, people taking career breaks, people taking some leave, perhaps, that if there were employees who were thinking about taking some parental leave, that they, not to be thrown out the door, but that they take it now whilst there isn't a lot of work, if they were thinking of doing it. Employers are saying, "No, I don't want to be telling everyone bad news all the time," but if you wait too long and all you're telling them is this is going to happen, we're going to have to make redundancies, that can be an awful shock to people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're right that getting called in on the date to be told there's going to be mass redundancies, in comparison to having gone through a couple of weeks or months of trying everything to save jobs, it leaves the workplace a little bit different, to those people who are being left behind, who are remaining in the workplace. So it's, I suppose, I wonder, from two fronts, you need to be obviously cognizant of your business, making sure that you're gonna get through this, but also is the morale of employees who are actually remaining with you. They don't need to be in this negative space.
We would always suggest and advise that you consult with the staff, because they might have ideas that haven't been thought about. They might be prepared to take certain steps that the employer might think they would never think of. So I think there is that balance. And then, as you say, when you do go down the road, at least with a consultation type approach, you are preparing the ground, and the staff that are potentially being kept will see that at least you've been fair, you've tried to follow a reasonable process, you haven't just made a decision or been seen to just make a snap decision and tell people that's it. Because, we know from the workplaces, particularly, again, the modern workplace, a lot of people are very close friends nowadays. It's a much more social place than perhaps it was in the past. People tend to know each other better, and with all sorts of social media connections, etc. There's generally a strong probability that people are going to be badly affected by people leaving. As you say, they're also going to have to look, and are they going to think, is this just phase one? Am I just not affected this time? What kind of reassurance can you give the people who are being left? Then you have even the practical side of things, where if you have told someone that their job is at risk, or you've made the decision that they're going to be made redundant, it is very difficult for the people, for both them who have been told the news, but also the people who have been left. So, you have to try and think about, do they continue to work? And if they're going to continue to stay in the workplace, how involved are they going to be? So if you're commencing a new project that they normally would be part of, do you say, look, we don't really need you this time? How do you communicate that to them? How do you communicate that to the others, so that it's not seen as you're just discarding them? Do you encourage them to work their notice? Do you have a plan about working their notice out? Or do you maybe, look at them not staying as long as their notice period is required, but pay them in lieu, which, again, without looking like you're running them out of the place, if you know what I mean. So that is a huge challenge for people, particularly where, as I say, one, the staff are remaining, think, is this just phase one of 3? Am I next? And also the emotional impact of people leaving can be very, very difficult. And there's a naturally, if you get it wrong, or you're seen to maybe not be as considerate as you should be, or the employees themselves who are being made redundant or whose jobs are a threat might react badly, and that's going to cause a problem in any company. That
and you kind of a lot of times just get that negative, well, I'm not going to take up the slack, because you've got rid of other people. So it's definitely and I think it's an overused word, but it's the most important one, is how you communicate it out. And it's that constant communication between the guys who are going and the guys who are staying. And that, obviously, as an employer, nobody wants to be in that situation, but it's how it's perceived by everybody, I think, is the key. So, David, we recently did a study with employers, just in regards to, what things are they concerned about going forward in the next kind of 6 to 12 months. And obviously one of the big areas was redundancies and layoffs and part-time layoffs and things like that. But the other area that I suppose I was hadn't expected so many people to have so many concerns about was the rise in COVID-related claims and lawsuits. So the companies were concerned that they would be liable if employees came back to work and they caught COVID-19 in the workforce. What happens when, we spoke about this earlier, David, what happens if somebody needs to leave work and they're isolating at home? What about the stress and anxiety in regards to coming back to work? And there was just this huge concern from companies in regards to, one, am I going to all of a sudden be sued by my employees because somebody caught COVID in the workplace? Or two, do I now have to pay everybody a sick leave because they're isolating at home? And who knows how many times for the next 12 months will people have to go and isolate? So do you think this is a real threat, David, or how can businesses minimize their exposure to such claims if that's the way it's going to go going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a couple of things. Yeah, there's a couple of things there. I mean, first and foremost, the employer has a responsibility for the health and safety of the employee. I think everyone's aware of that. When I suppose in the summertime, when the restrictions eased somewhat, and the government published the return to work protocol, that would certainly be my first suggestion, that employers familiarize themselves with that. It is going to be very difficult for people. So, you're into looking at layoffs. You're looking, if someone can't work and you can't provide a safe workplace for them, that is going to be a challenge from both sides.
Yeah, I definitely think that's one of the areas, just in my opinion, over the next couple of months that we're either going to see new legislation or guidelines or something. Because if you have a long-term illness and you're working in, like you said, a retail environment, and the shop, or if they can't guarantee you a safe working environment, then do you get to stay at home forever on the COVID payment? Or when does it become acceptable that the company, I suppose, lays you off or moves on, which is going to be, unfortunately, not a nice situation to be in. But I see, is that the reality of the situation, I wonder?
I think you do need to start looking where possible to those areas, in the same way perhaps as any injury or short-term or long-term disability or illness that might affect someone being able to do their job. We'd always recommend you get some medical support for decisions and possibly some health and safety advice as well.
So the other thing I was going to, and again, we spoke about this briefly, David, before we started recording, was I think, did I say it was about 2 weeks ago, we my kids had to go for tests, so we had to isolate for 3 days in the house. Now that's fine for me. I have no problem. I can work from home. My husband goes to work, so he obviously had to take the days off work. So, I mean, in those situations, how important is it that obviously we have to follow our guidelines, our handbooks and everything like that, but because things are kind of changing, the guidelines are changing, do we need to be updating our policies and procedures if those kind of non-normal sick leave things come up? Or how do companies prepare for those situations, which are undoubtedly going to arise over the next couple of months?
If you're able to work from home, well, clearly, in my view, the employer should continue to pay in the normal way. Mm-hmm. If you're not able to work, then it is one of those grey areas. So we're talking here about where you're not sick, but a relative or a child of yours, or for some reason, you have to stay at home to either look after someone, but it's not you that actually have been asked to self-isolate. And if someone's not able to work from home, then it's going to be down to, I suppose to some extent, a discretion between the employer and that employee as to whether that's annual leave or whether it's paid leave or whether it's unpaid leave. And that's definitely going to be a challenge. What people are doing, I suppose, most employers are trying to be, I say generous. Certainly, most of the employers that I would deal with are doing their best to try and reflect that this is through no fault of anyone's, and where possible, are paying. But to be perfectly honest with you, I suppose that's very often where people are able to do some work or all of their job as best they can. Again, where someone is just not able to work in those situations, there are unfortunately, employers who will just not be able to pay because they'll either need to replace that person with someone else, or pay other staff members overtime, or pay them additional to cover that off. And so that is, and it's always been an issue for people, but I think COVID has highlighted. So there's always been a question of, if I need to stay at home and I can't work from home, are you going to pay me? This has just, I think, been very much highlighted by the current situation that we're in.
And then, David, in regards to, obviously some offices are looking to open up now, some, are taking it in small groups and whatever. And obviously there's different health and safety with sanitizers and different entrances and things like that. Is that something that people should be looking at updating in their handbook, or is it just an updated policy that goes along with your handbook? Or, is that at this stage of the game, should people be completely not redoing handbooks, but changing their health and safety policies in their handbook, or just doing amendments and things like that to it?
Yeah, I think probably what could catch all of those things is a remote working policy. So some companies would have had remote working policies which were a bit more, if an employee wanted to work from home for a period of time, they had to, go through certain steps. They would have to apply to work from home. They would have to, make sure that they stay in communication. To answer your question, I think what we're suggesting is people look at those. So where you've had a remote working policy, look at that to see, does that need to be tightened up or revised? I think some of the areas people are getting concerned about is, long-term remote working. So if it's gone from a day a week or a couple of days a month to now, is it 3 or 4 or 5 days or 6 or 7 days a month or 8 days a month? Where does the responsibility now fall on the employer to make sure that they have the right equipment, that they're taking breaks, that they are recording their time, that they're not working longer hours than they should be? So these are the problems that people are running into now. And then you're getting into the whole question of, do they provide equipment? But obviously, a lot of companies don't have the financial wherewithal to do all that. But
yeah,
does that mean they can avoid it? So I think people would have to be very careful. Both that's up, I think, in terms of the physical well-being. And then I know, again, one of the big areas that remote working is thrown up is the emotional and mental well-being of people. And like the children were suffering badly when they weren't in school. Everyone saw that. Even if kids didn't like school, they missed it.
Yeah, I said this to you before, David. I was in work last week, and the best part of my day was that I met somebody for a coffee and went for a walk.
Yeah. So there is all that. And I know there are probably employers who might be listening saying, don't tell me I've got something else to worry about. Now I've got to worry about their well-being at home. But that's the reality. So I think, there is going to be a balance required. And whilst a lot of staff are enjoying the benefits of remote working, and perhaps, in the early part, maybe March and April, in the early part of COVID, they didn't really see the benefit because perhaps if they have kids or both people were working from home, it wasn't ideal. But now with maybe schools and creches open, it's a bit more realistic what it's like. At the same time, people, I think, are going to want to have some connection. And, we have a number of issues which, again, are being thrown up and no one's really thought of, people starting in a job. So they're starting work and they're not getting to meet anyone. They're sitting at home. The first time they might see their colleagues who they have to cooperate with and collaborate with is on a call, a Teams call or a Zoom call. And they're looking at a camera and they're telling the dog to keep quiet. And they're so it's, there's no induction per se. They don't get a chance. And all of those things that we're used to. when you dig down into it, I think, they're talking about spanning that over years. They're not talking about tomorrow. I think.
No, and we're social creatures as well. We do. I mean, like even for I think the dual working, hybrid working approach is going to be the way of the future. Personally, I'm not sure 100% remote working suits everybody. It does suit some people, but
No,
you did mention, which I also 100% believe is going to be one of the biggest challenges companies are going to see over the next 12 months is onboarding and offboarding remote workers, because it's totally different and it's a huge challenge.
It is. Yeah, I mean, when you look at the amount of effort, and again, I'm sure, you guys in HRLocker would see it as well, this induction and onboarding, and it was down to a T, and now it's all out the window. So it is. It is very challenging. And as you say, then on the other side of it, maybe have difficult conversations with people about performance. That's all been lost for the time being. So, there's no doubt, and I think that will have a knock-on effect on people. I think employers need to be very aware and do need to set up, some even, formal situations where they are checking in with everyone and making sure that everyone has someone looking after them, and not just presuming because someone's working from home that everything's fine.
Yeah, I think the next 12 months is going to be, we're going to see a lot of focus on the employee engagement side. Really, just people are remote, people are coming back, people are different situations, and how do you still remain focused and engaged with the employees, that your morale is high, and I think there's going to be a huge shift to that. Companies who never did focus on employee engagement before, that they will kind of look at different things for that.
It probably is on some people's the least they're worried about, but these are the things that in time they are going to have to start looking at. As you say, how are they going to give the staff opportunities where possible to meet other staff members, and especially where it's not necessarily a work environment per se.
Yeah, and I mean that's really, I think it's important for a company's culture, and it's absolutely, you can get that culture from a remote workforce. I mean, like I said, we've had remote workers, for the last 5 years or so, but it's important that you're conscious of having to work a little bit harder at making that communication between employees. And facilitating it for your employees, even exactly like I said, even if it's once a quarter or for the holidays or something like that you're doing something conscious to get people communicating outside of work.
To some extent, it's fortunate in a way that everyone's in it together. So, I mean, there are once people start hearing, or clients of yours or clients of mine, if a couple of people try things at work, at least you can pass on that information to your clients and say, well, look, have you thought about this? Because at least there is everyone's in the same boat. So not every solution fits everyone, but at least there'll be some ideas coming out, hopefully in the next few months from the HR world and the personal management world that will allow people at least look at certain things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, again, I really can't stress is that for people who were sent home in March and were working from home, we knew each other. We all knew each other. It was easy enough to pick up the phone or do a Teams or a Zoom call with a colleague because we already had a relationship with them and we knew them. So now companies have hired new people. It's a different relationship, and that remote onboarding is something that companies need to understand how they're going to bring that team together, even virtually, for the next few months, and how do they do that effectively, really?
Yeah.
So David, it was great to talk to you. If people want to get in contact with you, David, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Well, the website, Christelle, is thehrdepartment.ie, and my email is dbell@thehrdepartment.ie. If you want to get in contact with me.
So thanks a million, David. We'll have all David's contact details with the podcast, and so if anybody would like to get in contact with David, I'd highly recommend him. So take care, everybody, and we'll talk to you guys the next time.
Thanks for listening. check us out at HRLocker.com. The show was hosted by Christelle Rinn and produced by Jenny Martin. Subscribe to catch the latest episodes on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. If you'd like to feature, get in touch by emailing us at marketing@HRLocker.com. You can also follow HRLocker on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn.